Well, what have you got for me today, Dean?
Well, we have great questions from just about all over the place, but our very first question comes from Joseph. And Joseph asks, how do I answer someone who says grace teaching ignores the scriptures where God is also a God of wrath?
Well, I think that the questioner comes from the point of view where we tend to humanize God. So when the Bible talks about God's wrath, we assume, well, God must be wrathful, maybe like we humans become wrathful sometimes. In other words, you get ticked off. It won't tell somebody off. So we figure, well, that's probably the way God is. Of course, in a much more holy way than we are. But I would caution this person who is suggesting that by teaching God's grace, we are ignoring other things such as God's wrath, that maybe such an idea is humanizing God, for us to think that God's wrath is kind of akin to a human wrath. I suggest to you that God's wrath, and we've done a lot of teaching on this, is the intrinsic consequences that comes to us when we walk away from the love that God has intended for us to live in. You know, the way of the transgressor is hard. And so, and God's wrath is not in opposition to his love. God hates sin. He's wrathful towards sin. He's wrathful towards the damage that sin does in our lives. So I would suggest we have lots of teaching material on this, but it says in Romans 2 that God's wrath is expressed towards those who suppress the truth. So by suppressing the truth of what God has done, we come under those negative intrinsic consequences. I hope that helps you. What else have we got, Dean?
That's so good. And so our next question, it comes from Mike. And Mike asks, what would you say about the following statement? God causes suffering to accomplish his purposes.
Well, I think it kind of ties in what the first question there. There is built-in suffering in the fact, I said again, the way of the transgressor is hard. So when we can cause suffering to ourselves, sometimes we live in an evil, fallen world where there is suffering. But there's one thing to say that we learn from suffering. Hopefully we learn from everything we face in life. Anything that's gone wrong in our life, Dean, we learn from it, don't we? But it doesn't mean that God caused it. So I draw a distinction between God causing the suffering versus giving us grace to learn from it, which is a completely different thing.
Wow, that's so good. And so before I get to the next question, I just want to say that maybe you at home, you have a question. You can call us. You see the number on the screen, or you can text your question in. Any question that you'd like to have answered. And Pastor Peter may just answer that question. And so the third question we have is from Jonas. And Jonas is asking, was the pandemic God's plan?
Well, God is not the author of evil. And so I don't for a moment think God's plan is found in Genesis, that we would have dominion, we would live fruitful lives. And so, but because we live in a fallen world, this pandemic happened. And the beauty of the gospel is not that we are Teflon coated from whatever is happening in the world around us, but in all these things, meaning there's a whole lot of negative things, including the pandemic. In all these things, we are more than conquerors. We are not triumphalistic in saying that, you know, we are unaware of the pain around us and that it would touch us. But in that pain, we discover that God is greater. So that's how I would answer that. Yeah.
Awesome.
We have time for a few more, I hope.
We sure do. And so the pandemic was a common theme that many people asked about. And so Betty also continues with the pandemic, and she says, how is God going to use COVID-19 to extend his kingdom?
Well, again, I don't know if God would use COVID-19. That I think in COVID-19, in the coronavirus, God is there. God is speaking. God, whatever is going on, God is in the now. He's not for after the pandemic is over. He's for the now. And so if I make the answer very personal here, Dean, to this question, personally, I've been telling people how the Lord spoke to me. And he said, what steps of faith should you be taking now? And I said, God, you have to show me. I don't know. I'm used to having to rent a stadium. I could have a big meeting, and now I can't have that. So what should we do? And then, you know, we're now reaching out on Facebook Live, YouTube campaigns, reaching the Hindi-speaking world. All those kind of things are happening. So I think in that sense, God is working with us in the pandemic, in the situation we are in. And he'll work with you.
Absolutely. Now, Virginia, she wants to know about prayer in the pandemic, and she says, does God hear our prayers asking for Corona to be destroyed?
Well, I tell you, like all viruses, I think Corona will be gone. It's like the Spanish flu, it's gone 400 years ago. And what I would say there is yes, of course, God heals from COVID-19. Jesus bore our sicknesses, carried our pain, and that would include whatever are the effects of this virus. But I caution, and I have cautions about this, how I hear people speak sometimes, usually preachers, who kind of speak on the basis we've been fasting, we've been praying, we've been doing this, and we're taking a stand, and we're declaring, and it's so much me, and they say on the basis of that, COVID-19 is not going to affect us. And some of those who even said that have died themselves. So I say, no, I believe in Psalm 91, God is my protector. But I would never say, well, because Peter Youngren declares it, and because Peter Youngren says, and because Peter Youngren prayed and fasted. No. It's because of Jesus Christ. And so, yes, Jesus heals from the effects of COVID-19 on the basis of his mercy, on the basis of who God is. So let's not take any credit to ourselves in that. Have you got time maybe for one more?
I've got one
I'm getting
more.
the 30-second signal here from our floor director.
I've got one more juicy one, and I know this is a hot topic right now. And the question comes from Jane, and she asked, should we send our kids back to school with the pandemic going on?
Well, it's easy for me to answer because I don't have any kids in school age. Pastor Nathan was here coming on the set, but he kind of left this area right now. I could ask him because he has kids in that age anymore. First of all, I think do what is in your heart, what you feel conviction about. You know, I'm a little bit biased. Many of you know, as a teenager, I was born and raised in Sweden. I came to Canada as a teenager, and of course in Sweden, they never did close down the schools, and they seemed all, when I talk to people from that part of the world, they seem happy about that, and they wonder why we are all so uptight here. But I'm not a medically trained person. I'm just going to leave it with that dean. And our time is up, but do send your questions. We do want to hear from you, and I believe Pastor Nathan is up next.
Absolutely, he
All
sure is.
right.